At the end of 2024, two new Chinese aircraft were caught on camera, and they sparked instant speculation. Many media outlets simply declared that these are the new Chinese 6th generation fighter jets. Let's clarify what this generation concept came from, its history and limitations, and check how the concept can be applied regarding this new aircraft. Although there are no official criteria, there is a roughly unified perspective that is coherent from a technical and evolutionary standpoint. The following summary is only an almost bullet point style presentation to understand the foundation of the generation classification. For those interested in the topic in more detail, there are two video series on the channel. One of them is dealing with the development history of multi-role fighter jets, the another is about the Homeland Air Defense fighters. However, only the latter series had been completed when I released this video. This summary focuses only on the drive behind the new fighter generations and in short about the necessary equipment, their main features and the capability what they provided. The classic generational classification cannot be applied to Homeland Air Defense fighter jets, so please nobody post such thing in the comment field that where are the MiG-25 and MiG-31. They are out of the scope just as every other American and Soviet Homeland Air Defense fighter. One more thing, if you are really familiar with the why and the technology background behind the generation classification, for you only the last two chapters of the video is important. Okay, how this whole thing started? Jet engine powered fighters appeared at the end and just after the end of the Second World War. The goal was to increase flight performance, achieving higher top speed and climbing capability, even if this came with some disadvantages at the time. The specific power of early turbojet engines was already higher compared to the best piston engines, but jet engines had very poor dynamic behavior. Early gas turbines spooled up slowly, and the throttle had to be handled very carefully. High performance also came with high fuel consumption, so the range of jet-powered fighters were shorter compared to the piston engine-powered World War II fighters for a long time. How much more powerful was the gas turbine? The weight of the piston engine of the Messerschmitt 109 G6 variant was roughly the same as the MiG-15's jet engine, about 700 kilograms. The top speed of the German fighter at high altitude was just over 650 km per hour, while the MiG-15, which was 30% heavier, could reach a top speed of 1100 km per hour. The development was rapid. The Messerschmitt 262, even with two jet engines, only reached a speed of 850 km per hour, but just 3-4 years later, fighters were already exceeding a top speed of 1000 km per hour. The first wave of jet fighters included the German Messerschmitt 262, the British Gloster Meteor, and the American P-80 Shooting Star. These fighters were designed and manufactured during or immediately after the World War II. In my opinion, these can be called zero generation. Aerodynamically, many of them were the same as Second World War piston engine powered fighters. They had straight wings. The jet engine was the only real difference even in the early post-Second World War era. A typical fighter of this post-war era was the F-84 Thunderjet. Even though the Messerschmitt 262 was the first deployed jet fighter, it was more innovative than the others with its swept wing design and excellent gas turbine. The other contemporary fighters were designed with radial gas turbines and mostly with straight wings. However, in terms of performance and quality, the German jet fighter cannot be compared to the post-World War II fighters. Its production quality was poor because of the lack of resources. Its lifespan tended to be zero because of the attrition nature of the Second World War. The instrumentation and armament of early jet fighters were essentially the same of the World War II planes. They did not have radar, at best they had a radio rangefinder. The effective use of the machine guns or cannons could be aided by a primitive mechanical or electromechanical ballistic computer, but even this was not common. The first generation was essentially about the competition between the two types of gas turbines, radial and axial, and aerodynamic redesign. What was the goal for the second generation? Supersonic capable bombers and fighter bombers were on the edge of the horizon. Even subsonic strike planes could fly with almost the speed of sound. Therefore, to successfully intercept them at high altitudes, it was necessary to chase them at least a bit faster than the speed of sound. Night interception capability became mandatory because a bomber attacking with a nuclear bomb was always accurate enough to destroy a small city or a troop assembly zone. What was necessary to overcome these challenges? Larger engines combined with higher specific performance. The battle between the two types of gas turbines was decided, as flying with supersonic speed was only possible with an afterburner-equipped axial gas turbine. From the mid-50s, the afterburner stage appeared, which significantly increased thrust in exchange for range. The supersonic era began. Delta wing design was common for the Mach 2 capable planes, but it was not used exclusively, especially for the early second generation fighters. Because of the expected higher top speed, thinner wing profiles were used with higher and higher wing sweep angle. Early second generation fighters could only reach Mach 1.3 top speed region, and mostly only without external stores. At the end of the era, Mach 2 was achievable with minimal armament. The trade-off this high speed was high landing and high takeoff speeds, requiring longer runways. The low speed handling quality was often notoriously poor. Fighters got radars. Initially only larger fighters, and eventually even smaller ones like the MiG-21PF. These were analog long pulse repetition time radars with essentially zero jamming resistance, typically with a detection range of between 20–30 km against large bomber-sized targets. These early radars couldn't detect low-flying targets against ground clutter. Even flying at low did not make possible to detect low-flying targets. These radars were only usable with ground radar-aided interception. The early radars had only two roles. One, to find the target in terminal phase of an interception, and they also aided the targeting of guns or infrared-guided air-to-air missiles. At the end of the second generation, infrared-guided air-to-air missiles became the part of weaponry. With the first of these kind, only non-maneuvering or minimally maneuvering targets about 2G maximum overload could be engaged, and only from the rear hemisphere. Such missiles were the American AIM-9B Sidewinder and the Soviet Air-3S. Machine guns disappeared, 20mm became the minimum caliber for guns. The first wave of the second generation fighters was represented by the American F-100 Super Sabre, and the Soviet MiG-19 by the end of the generation was marked by the MiG-21, English Electric Lightning, Mirage 3, and the infamous F-104 Starfighter. They surpassed the previous generation by being able to intercept higher speed targets, even with air-to-air missiles, but still only from the rear hemisphere, but they could do also at night. They accelerated and climbed significantly better than early M fighters, making many older fighters hopeless in air combat against them. For the third generation, the goal was to further develop the capabilities that appeared in the second generation. These included carrying a larger payload at the same top speed and having head and side aspect engagement capability. Against high-speed targets around Mach 1.5, turning behind them and attacking from there became almost impossible. What was needed for this? The last generation of turbojet engines, the remaining performance reserves was squeezed out from the concept. It became possible to reach twice the speed of sound even with the 13–14 tons airframes and carrying larger air-to-air missiles than small infrared-guided ones. More advanced radars and new missiles what made possible the head-on and side engagement. Due to the high relative closing speed of targets, radar detection ranges had to be 15–18 km. This provided the time needed to perform necessary manual actions to aim and launch a missile. It also became possible to engage low-flying targets even against ground clutter from relatively short distances. In the West, this was typically ensured by high pulse repetition Doppler radars. The Soviets had limited capabilities in this area, with radars equipped with analog filters and external coherent base moving target selectors, which was called SDCVK. Semi-active radar-guided air-to-air missiles alongside with new radars. New kind of missiles were needed for head-on engagement capability. Only one target could be engaged at the same time with this kind of missiles, just as with the infrared-guided ones. Improved infrared-guided missiles with cooled seekers could still only attack from behind, but from a wider zone and longer range. Some fighters got one-way data link, typically for displaying instructions from ground radars and guidance systems. On Soviet aircraft, this included systems like Lazur, but used small lights as display. It was very primitive from today's point of view, but at the time it provided the fast data transfer without using radio speech with its limitations. Even some second-generation fighters got it, like the MiG-21 bis. Due to the radar-guided air defense missile systems, radar warning receivers appeared. Some second-generation fighters were retrofitted with these. Not universally, but due to the experiences from Vietnam War, cartridges were introduced which could contain infrared flares or chaff bundles. These were either built into the fuselage or carried in pods, sacrificing a part of the armament. Electronic jamming equipment thanks to the radar-guided SAMs. The equipment could be integrated into airframe or carried in pods depending on the size of the plane, or sacrificed other capabilities to have it. Precision strike weapons. Some fighters could have a precision strike weapon. These were typically radio-controlled missiles and bombs like the AGM-15 Bullpup or the AGM-62 Walleye. More advanced Western fighters had inertial navigation systems. Interestingly, even the second-generation infamous German F-104G fighters had such systems, which was unheard at the time for such a small plane. I think the pinnacle of the generation was the F-4 Phantom family. Other fighters of this generation were the MiG-23, the Mirage F-1 and the Swedish Viggen. Apart from the F-4 fighter, typically a family of aircraft had dedicated version designed purely for fighter and strike roles. The Mirage F-1, Viggen and the MiG-23 were such examples. Nevertheless, fighters were also capable of using strike weapons, which could even be guided, but dedicated strike subvariants represented a higher level of strike capability. The flight performance of the third-generation fighters mostly stagnated. Further increasing speed above Mach 2 was pointless. However, fighters became, so to speak, smarter compared to the second generation. The driving force behind the fourth generation was the experiences from the Vietnam air battles. Contrary to expectations, the first generation subsonic MiG-17s often achieved success in maneuvering air combat against the third generation and far more expensive F-4 Phantom. Thanks to this unpleasant feedback, the United States established the guidelines defining the new generation, then it was followed with varying degree of success around the world. The primary focus was on developing close maneuvering air combat capabilities. Everything else got lower priority. Turbofan engines. These were much more economical than turbojets at subsonic speeds. The enormous thrust needed for maneuvering air combat was provided by afterburners, producing more extra thrust than ever before. The aerodynamic design was optimized for dogfights, the close maneuvering air combat. Despite this, the new fighters could reach Mach 2 with minimal armament, thanks to the large excess thrust, not because of the aerodynamic optimization. The use of LERCs, leading-edge route extensions, became common, creating vortices to high angle of attack maneuvers. Wings typically had leading-edge slats and slotted flaps, improving high angle of attack maneuvering at both high and low speeds, and significantly reducing landing speeds compared to the second and third generations. Fighters were fundamentally designed according to the lifting body concept, with the fuselage generating significant lift thanks to the smooth fuselage wing transition. HOTAS system, the hands-on throttle and stick design allowed the most frequently used functions to be controlled from only using the throttle and stick, without the pilot having to take their hands off. Although aircraft were previously designed this way, unprecedented number of functions were placed on the throttle and stick. the detection and tracking of targets with radar against ground clutter dramatically improved. This was ensured by Doppler radars with low and medium pulse repetition frequencies and digital signal processing. From the early 80s, synthetic aperture radars brought a new era in ground target detection, with mapping modes capable of displaying photo-like details. Tracking multiple aerial targets simultaneously became possible thanks to the onboard digital computers. This was the track-wise scan capability, which appeared first on the F-14 Tomcat. New generation of semi-active radar-guided missile with dual thrust profile with significantly increased engagement range. The first being the AIM-7F Sparrow. Still only one target could be tracked at a time. The F-14 had unique capabilities in this area, able to simultaneously engage up to 6 targets within a narrow angle range with the nearly half-ton AIM-54 Phoenix active radar-guided missile. Head-on engagements became possible with the new generation of infrared-guided missiles. The first of this kind was the AIM-9 Lima Sidewinder. These missiles were later integrated into previously manufactured fighters and even for strike aircraft like the A-7 Corsair or the A-10 Thunderbolt. In the cockpit, there were still relatively many electromechanical instruments and switches, but their layout was more logical compared to the previous generation. From the F-16 Block 25 and the F-15-8A fighters, the cockpit design changed radically in the early to mid-80s. Later 4th generation fighter cockpits are practically descendant of these. The F-14 did not have a true head-up display, but later American fighters had such ones that could display more than a dozen parameters in multiple modes. Inertial navigation systems with mechanical gyroscopes were replaced by more advanced ones with laser ring gyroscopes. They significantly improved the accuracy compared to the predecessors. The multi-directional data links between fighters appeared first on the F-14 Tomcat. Later, the other 4th generation fighters received these during the 90s. All 4th generation fighters were designed to be multi-role with strike capabilities, but this was not utilized in the basic versions of the F-14 and F-15, although the latter was always capable of strike missions. In contrast, the F-16 quickly and noisily exploited this capability. The 4th generation Soviet fighters, the MiG-29 and Su-27, arrived almost a decade late. The generational advancement was in their aerodynamic design and flight performance. In maneuvering air combat, the performance parameters of the two new Soviet fighters were almost equal to those of American aircraft in almost every aspect. However, they lacked radar mapping mode and significant improvements in cockpit ergonomics. Their only undeniable advantage was the R-73 missile, which could be launched with high off-board sight angles thanks to the helmet-mounted side and the thrust-vectoring rocket engine. 4th generation fighters primarily focused on maneuvering air combat and significantly higher beyond vision range capabilities, and they mostly met with the requirements. There were only a few exceptions. The F-16 did not have beyond visual range combat capability, as it was originally intended to achieve this with the AIM-120 MRAM active radar-guided missile in the early 80s. But the MRAM entered service only in 1992. The F-14A's flight performance in maneuvering air combat was significantly weaker than the other 4th generation fighters due to its TF-30 engine. Only the F-14B corrected this issue by having the significantly better and stronger GE F-110 power plant. With the end of the Cold War, many countries decided to modernize their 4th generation fighter jets in service or acquire their upgraded and still produced version instead of developing entirely new fighters. This led to the emergence of 4+, and about 10 years later, the 4++ generation designations. What does the plus sign signify? Thanks to the digital revolution and powerful onboard computers, the capabilities of existing platforms and hardware could be better utilized. Color multifunction displays became a basic requirement in the cockpit, along with modular hardware architecture and flexible software programmability. Integrating the AIM-120 MRAM missile is considered the 4+ level, enabling all Western fighters with mechanically scanned radars to simultaneously attack up to 4 aerial targets if the radar had the track-wise search capability. The multi-target engagement capability was previously exclusive to the F-14 Tomcat with its nearly half-ton mid-size. In comparison, the MRAM missile is less than 200 kilograms. Close air combat capability was improved by the introduction of helmet-mounted displays, allowed important flight parameters to be visible without looking at the HUD. Responding to the Soviet development, new helmet displays combined with the helmet size enabled the use of air-to-air missiles with greater of-board sight angles than the L-73, such as the AIM-9X or the European IRIS-T. GPS-based navigation systems essentially replaced inertial navigation systems, although the latter remained on the planes as a backup. Integration of new strike weaponry, laser-guided and other precision strike weapons, previously available only to narrow range of dedicated strike aircraft. The first generation of GPS-guided GDAM bombs appeared in the late 90s, followed by similar guided weapons like the AGM-158 GSOW. Targeting posts developed for laser-guided bombs during the Cold War became standard on fighters, such as the Lantern or the later developed Lightning or Sniper. They are predecessors of the Cold War era PAVE Spike Pod. More widespread integration of Link 16 and similar two-way data links. What does the additional plus sign in the 4++ generation signify? Essentially, it covers integrating some of the equipment originally developed for the 5th generation fighters. Replacement of mechanically scanned radars with PESA or ASA type radars. 360-degree infrared and missile launch warning sensors built into the aircraft, although some can only carry such sensors in pods. Wide weapon integration, top-tier fighters became capable of using almost any weapon their size allowed. Full-spectrum strike capability from laser-guided bombs up to long-range anti-ship and cruise missiles. Depending on the variant, the 4+ and 4++ generations included the Super Hornet, Eurofighter Typhoon, Rafale or Gripen, and all previously manufactured but variously upgraded fighters from the F-15, F-16, F-18 trio. Some Russian, Chinese and Japanese-made fighters also belong to this category, like the Su-35 or the J-16. The Su-30 family could be considered as a 4+ generation. The foundation of the 5th generation fighters is dated back to the end of the Cold War, but the first such fighter, the F-22 Raptor, only entered service much later, at the end of 2005. The second of such kind of fighter is the F-35. Apart from these two, only the Chinese J-20 fighter has been produced in large numbers, which is likely to be classified in this category. What were the expectations for these? Low observability, or as popularly called stealth. It is achieved through special geometric design, internal weapon base, and numerous other requirements, see in the video about them. New generation engines with significantly higher specific thrust than the 4th generation had. ASA-based radar with LPI feature, current onboard radar warning receivers detect uncertainly or not at all. 360-degree infrared camera system for missile launch warning. Highly integrated onboard systems, far exceeding the standards of the 4th generation. The stealth capability of the 5th generation fighters has essentially nullified the area defense and area denial capability of long-range surface-to-air missile systems. 5th generation fighters can fly at medium and high altitudes even in the presence of the most advanced air defense systems, as the detection and engagement ranges drop to a fraction of their nominal maximum, sometimes even to 1/10 of their maximum. The Ukrainian-Russian war has proven the concept of area denial SAM systems, such as the S-300 or S-400, which seriously restrict the operation of non-stealth fighters. Stealth fighters also have a dominant advantage over previous non-stealth fighters, as it is very difficult to track them. Thanks to its enormous thrust, the F-22 can fly at speeds above Mach 1.5 for a significant time without using afterburner, an ability known as super cruise. Contrary to marketing claims, only stealth fighters can achieve this because their stealth design includes internal weapon base, resulting in a fraction of the wave drag compared to conventional fighters which rely on external stores. More about this topic in the Patreon extra. What is the problem with generational classification? Let's take the Cold War era MiG-21 bis fighter as an example. Just because it had a better radar, new air-to-air missiles and a special engine mode, did it represent a generational leap compared to the MF or PF variants despite many inherited limitations? No, it just pushed the boundaries of the generation, but it still did not have a head-on engagement capability, no matter that the R3R missile was semi-active radar guided. Its maneuvering air combat performance went nowhere near of a true 4th generation fighter, no matter the special afterburner feature under 4000 meters of altitude. But at least the MiG-21 bis meant a newly manufactured and not an upgraded airframe. Let's check a post-Cold War example, the MiG-21 Lancer family. This refers to a different upgraded versions of the MiG-21 MF fighter. These have cockpits similar to the early 90s F-16C variants. One variant of the Lancer became capable of precision strikes with laser-guided bombs autonomously using a targeting pod. They did not receive beyond visual range air combat capability, but they have helmet displays and integrated the R-73 missile, giving them the same high of bore science launch capability as the MiG-29. The Indian MiG-21 Bison, an upgraded version of the BIS, has beyond visual range air combat capability with the Russian R-77 air-to-air missile and the new radar. So what generation are these MiG-21 variants compared to the original F-13 variant? Some of their capabilities, such as flight performance, barely changed in absolute terms. On the other hand, the autonomous use of laser-guided bombs is a capability that the F-16 family only received after the Cold War and only in upgraded or newly manufactured versions. A second-generation airframe now had the capabilities that even the first 4th generation fighters did not have. Even ancient Western aircraft received such extensive upgrades. For example, the avionics of the Turkish F-4E Terminator 2020 make it equivalent to early 2000 F-16Cs, but the F-4's flight performance is still on the 3rd generation level, and its cockpit is anything but a glass cockpit. So, what generation number should be used here? Considering the classification, the American AV-8B Harrier is similarly problematic, which many call fighter. Its upgraded version has digital multi-mode radar and even beyond visual range air combat capability thanks to the MRAM missile. However, the aircraft designation A stands for attack, indicating a strike role. Moreover, the Harrier is subsonic, so it does not even meet the entry-level criteria for the 2nd generation. I think the problem is clear. At the end of the Cold War and in the post-Cold War era, the capabilities of some 20, 30 or even 40-year-old platforms were so drastically extended with upgrades that the system falls apart. Capabilities of an aircraft arriving 20 years later could be implemented on much earlier ones thanks to the advancement of digital technology. It is more effective to characterize fighters based on their fundamental properties and classify them according to which generation they belong to. Let's try applying this rule with the new Chinese aircraft, as well as to check whether it meets the requirements to have significantly better than any 5th generation fighter. From what has been presented so far, it is clear that when the generation classification number increased, it meant serious difference in capabilities. The difference was easily understandable, we can say in tactical terms it was easily noticeable. The difference represented a significant gap in certain combat situations. Therefore, the same should be expected from an aircraft labeled as a 6th generation compared to the 5th generation ones. Let's see what could make the Chinese technology demonstrator a 6th generation plane just by looking at the known images. Is the new fighter stealthy? Yes, but there is nothing new in that. Every 5th generation fighter jet has the same feature. It has a diamond shape and no vertical stabilizers. So what? That alone does not give it a radical advantage over any existing stealth fighter, it could even have disadvantages thanks to this. Could it have a different variable cycle engine? Yes. Could this bring significant tactical advantages? Well, not really. A prototype of a variable cycle engine already flew in the YF-22 and YF-23 technology demonstrators in 1991. However, the F-22 and the later F-35 were produced with more conservative engines. Simply put, the cost-benefit ratio did not justify using a more advanced engine. It should be noted that the Chinese industry has spent decades copying and producing engines roughly equivalent to a 40-year-old IL-31 engine. Assuming a variable bypass engine is more than bold. But even that would be not a tactical game changer, it would just slightly improve acceleration and range. Based on the videos, the Chinese aircraft is manned, so it does not represent a new category here either. But even if it were unmanned, why would that represent a generational leap? If an unmanned F-22 existed from tomorrow, its tactical capability and survivability would not be different at all. It would have the same armament, speed, acceleration, range, etc. There is zero information about the tactical electronics based on the external video recording. The onboard STAP ASR radar expected in the 6th generation is still in the conceptual phase even in the West due to the lack of computational capacity. Of course, computing performance improves year by year, so we just have to wait. Having a radar warning receiver capable of detecting reliably the low probability of intercept ASR radars is also a future development, with computational capacity being the first limitation and the expected cost being the second. Nothing is known about from a video recording. Active self-defense capability with directed energy, laser or similar solutions, possibly using mini-missiles, is also a future development. We know nothing about these either. But this alone would not break the 5th generation, as it only increases self-defense capability, but does not solve the long-range detection of stealth fighters. The ability to use even longer-range air-to-air missile is also expected, but this would mean only a new missile. This would not mean a gap like happened when the semi-active radar-guided missiles were replaced by active radar-guided, as happened with the transition from the AIM-7 Sparrow to AMRAAM. Especially since an extremely long-range missile is useless if target detection is not possible at long distances. Based on these, there is no basis for calling any of the new planes a 6th generation fighter. It is even questionable to be called fighter due to its large size. It seems more like a bomber missile carrier strike aircraft in terms of size. For previous fighter generations, it was always visible or understandable the reason of the higher number before the generation word, or the reason of the 1 or 2 plus signs which were added to the 4th generation. In this case, simply there is no visible reason to call the new Chinese planes as 6th generation ones. Moreover, so far nobody has presented such a conception what could be called a 6th generation fighter. It is quite strange that most people have not even reached the point of understanding the generational classification, and they treat as only, we can say, a shopping list. But from such a list cannot be deduced features what would break the main features of the 5th generation. The length of the list does not matter, which such fancy and commonly said things are longer range missiles, remotely controlled drones farms, etc. If the combined capabilities by the items of the shopping list do not break the advantage of the 5th generation, such as the stealth capability, the LPI ASR radar, and the 360-degree camera systems of the F-35, then why would it be a 6th generation? Such plane is only a different 5th generation fighter. Just because something looks different does not mean that it represents a generational leap. Does the F-18 Hornet look like as the F-16? No, it does not. But that does not mean that the Hornet was a generational leap compared to the F-16. It was just a different 4th generation fighter. Even though the MiG-23M had variably sweep wings and the Mirage F1 did not, the MiG was not some wonder weapon and a generational leap ahead. What can be said about the new Chinese fighter? That it is surprisingly large, has different shape and maybe 3 engines. But this does not justify calling it 6th generation. In the Patreon Extra, some commonly quoted idea of different kind of shop list are explained why do not mean a new generation. Moreover, what we see might just be a technology demonstrator or prototype. During the development of combat aircraft, numerous demonstrator aircraft were built that never went into mass production. Do we remember the Foreword Swapwing X-29, the 3D Thrust Vectoring X-31, or the Sukhoi Su-47 or the MiG-29 OVT? These were also heavily hyped by the media in their time, yet none of them developed into mass-produced types. It is not guaranteed that any new mass-produced combat aircraft will emerge from these new Chinese planes. If you like the video, you can share, like, subscribe or ring the bell and follow the channel. You can support it via Patreon for exchange for early access, voting on plan topics and extra content and updates about the project. So far, 13 Patreon extra had been released, their descriptions are in the link under the video.